Hi, welcome back to the Mysterious Ways channel. Today we're going to be talking about real estate and taking a elevated view of what investing in real estate really kind of looks like, what that entails. Is it as easy as they make it sound? And the focus of this video is also kind of geared a little bit more towards those who are of the mindset that the Lord is going to be providing a wealth transfer to his children for the upcoming seasons, whatever that might look like. Um, First of all, obviously, nothing in this video is going to be financial advice. I am not a real estate agent or a realtor, and I am not an accountant or any other legal or professional advice. When getting into contracts and things of those nature, make sure you understand what you are signing and what you're getting yourself into, and certainly enlist the assistance of the appropriate professional assistance. That being said, we're going to jump right into this. So we're going to approach this from there's four basic hows to investing in real estate. We're going to go over each of those. We're going to approach all of these other aspects just like that. We're going to discuss the types of properties. That's going to be seem rather obvious when we hit it. The age-old location is going to be applicable. We're going to think about when to time the market. Is now a good time? Is later on? We'll take a look at those. As an operator of a property, a real estate investment, I look at that as somebody who is the go-to phone call when there is a situation, or the person that is writing the checks and receiving the bills. And that means that you're paying the taxes, you're talking to the insurance agent, you're negotiating with tenants, neighbors, HOAs, things of that nature directly. That's almost like being the actual owner occupant oftentimes. And then also we got manage, which is very similar, except you basically give somebody all of the instructions on how to do that on your behalf, and you just manage those affairs and um, react accordingly. From a passive income standpoint, that is basically a situation where you have liquid funds that are available for utilization in a variety of real estate investing opportunities, whatever your underwriting criteria might look like. And basically, you put money out there with all the appropriate promissory notes and legal documentation to see a return on those funds. And basically, you don't want to understand the ins and outs of the day to day. You just want to see the regular payments coming in according to the terms that you have negotiated. And then the last one is owning a property just simply because you think it's going to be worth more in the future. And that's been certainly historical of properties increase in value. And there's a number of reasons for that. And we're not going to dive into that in this video, but we will take a look at some of the how the real estate cycles have played in relation to value. Okay, so talking about the types of real estate. The first one is land. Nothing on it. Maybe there's things underneath it in it, such as, your mineral rights, oil, gas, precious metals, gemstones, things of that nature. Um, Agricultural land. That's where you want to be very aware of what the water rights are to the property and where that water comes from. Other things like recreational things that can be uh, destination retreat type centers or hunting activities or a reason to go somewhere more of a leisure activity or things of that nature. But in general, land is just kind of sitting there most of the time waiting for some future value. Sometimes you can create an income from it, such as with agricultural or like truck parking. Then getting into residential. Residential is going to span a vast majority of real estate classifications, but we want to start off first with the farmhouse. And going back to our previous illustration talking about agricultural land, the farmhouse and agricultural land can be purchased through USDA financing, which is a unique set of financing based off of agricultural needs and utilization that most properties don't get the opportunity or access to. So that's a unique source of funds that can assist in the acquisition of those sorts of properties. But in general, residential refers to any combination of a single family home, a duplex, which is two families under one roof, a triplex, three under one roof, fourplex, four under one roof. Occasionally you come across a fiveplex, and with some of the underwriting guidelines that can squeeze in still under a residential property. After five doors, you're certainly looking into a commercial property. And we'll look at those in just a minute. Given our current market and where we have come over the last 50 to 75 years and the pricing, it's not generally my recommendation to look into buying single family homes for investment as long-term strategies. The reason being is that if something was to occur to the income source for the occupant of that structure, all of your income for that property just got slashed and you're held with all the expenses. We can kind of roll that out over other properties. That's where you see the duplex and the triplex and the fourplex, where if one is vacant, the other one still are providing an opportunity for income. Generally, my recommendation for duplexes and to fourplexes is for somebody that is either in the military or first time home buyer, younger, that is looking to get into something where they're not necessarily fronting all of the mortgage expense on their own. They have the opportunity to rent out part of that structure to pay the mortgage bill. And provided the the average prices, that certainly is a good entry level to to real estate and residential. Mobile homes, we'll talk about those as we talk about commercial. Individual mobile homes can be a residential, but the mobile home park is a commercial property. Again, anything five doors generally or more becomes a commercial property, even if the sole purpose of the property is to house people. Apartment complexes, hotels, a land lease community, assisted living complexes. Each one of those we will kind of dive in just the quick nitty gritty of the pros and cons. But then you think about short-term rentals, each one of those that you have is an individual business that it needs individual management, that has individual cleaning and various other nuances. Okay, so on mobile home parks, those can be very good, but they can also be extremely challenging. One of the primary things that you want to look at for a mobile home park is what sources the water. Is the municipal source going to all of the individual uh, trailers, or is it a situation where the municipal source or a well source is the stops and all of the maintenance of the underground piping from that point is the responsibility of the mobile home park? The reason that matters is over time, these systems can get rather expensive, and as they deteriorate, they can be um, inconvenient to say the least, um, especially if not planned for upgraded maintenance. So that's one big item to take a peek into with mobile home parks. Same thing kind of goes with camping and RV parks, whereas both of those have very similar business models. RV parks are a pinch more transient and seasonal. Um, but both of those are relatively similar. Assisted living complexes come also in a variety of levels of care. It can be simply assisted living all the way up to full on nursing care and all of the various regulations and uh, requirements that go with each one of those as required by each state's Department of Health. And so being able to offer those sorts of services is almost taking an apartment complex and tripling or more the price of rent to provide those additional services, whether that's assisted all the way up to nursing or further. Student housing, very similar concept as well. Obviously, it is a pinch seasonal, about 9 to 10 months out of the year, which gives plenty of time for turning units and planning those upgrades during the off season of school campus. Again, student housing is like taking an apartment complex and probably doubling normal rent rates because of the affiliation with a particular school or a sorority, things of that nature. Land lease communities are unique. They generally relate to something in the consistency of a modular home being brought in, put on a permanent foundation where oftentimes like front landscape is provided, but you don't the person who owns the home does not actually own the land. That is actually leased, which is similar to a mobile home park, except now you have a permanent structure on unowned land. Problem with those oftentimes is that the management can, as with any business, whether it's handled ethically or with foresight, that's to each their own. But you need to look into those sort of things when evaluating an opportunity like that. Furthermore, those sorts of communities typically are harder hit when it comes to foreclosures and downturns of the market, and they have extremely low um, fall rates whenever they bottom out. Other commercial spaces, just and even with the residential commercial, we start talking in different terminologies. We start thinking in terms of pro formas and cap rates, capitalization, and internal rate of return. Return on investment is probably the most common of those terms that you might be familiar with. But being able to take a property and somewhat compare it based off of a cap rate, well, that's completely subjective. It's subjective on what that person that already owns it, do they have a mortgage? Do they have mortgage expense? Will you have a mortgage expense? How do they operate their utilities? There's a lot of variables that can make a pro forma look good or not really be realistic. And so you have to be able to look at a property and put your own due diligence into it and establish some historical by contacting utility providers or looking at utility bills and start saying, okay, here's what some historical information is, here's what we plan to do, here are these measures that we're going to increase revenue, decrease costs through reduced utilities by more energy efficient light bulbs, for example, any number of things. You have to look at how will you operate the building based off of a little bit of information that is historical but you're not necessarily operating it the same way. So you're not always comparing the same types of apples, if that makes sense. But whenever we're talking about commercial space, we're talking about either things where we store stuff or we're trying to operate some sort of business activity, whether we're making widgets, marketing widgets, or transporting widgets. Some some level of sales or insurance or meeting space is generally needed for those different types of occupancies. And so whenever looking at commercial space, office space, one thing that we want to remember specifically from a few years ago when we experienced numerous shutdowns and employees being sent home, what is the nature of the local economy of the property that you're looking at? Does the workforce, will they be able to go home? So is office space truly necessary if a situation was to arise again? Same thing for retail space. How much retail space has gone vacant in a particular market just simply because of online purchasing through the retailers like Amazon and all the various ones, not specifically call out any particular one. Medical office space, for example, is a bit different in the sense that generally many medical procedures require an actual interaction, which means that you come to a facility to be seen because that is where the doctor's office is that has all of the various testing equipment that they, you know, CAT scan machines, MRIs, X-rays, the gamut of specialty equipment that they utilize. Therefore, medical office space can sometimes have a higher retention because of its unique requirements. However, as the buildings get older, you start going from an A class building to down to a B class, maybe a C class. Is that connected to an older hospital network that is no longer a primary facility in the emergency system? And as such, oftentimes medical tenants move to stay closer to an operating hospital. So again, there's any number of reasons why commercial space may go vacant from time to time. We have to remember the reasonings during the early 2020s, the first part of this decade, of why um, office space, retail space, number of those went empty for months upon months, where you as the owner are still trying to maintain that that asset in a functional status. One of the things with real estate is that an empty building causes more harm than some of your worst tenants. While that sounds counterintuitive, building systems are generally intended to be operated. Plumbing systems, electrical systems, just the general fact of people coming and going to eliminate vagrancy and other activity. Not to mention overgrowth of vegetation, animals, raccoons, and squirrels can be some of the most devastating to abandoned structures. Moving on into uh, industrial spaces, things there that we're looking for are what are the availability of utilities? What, how much electricity is truly available? What is the water pressure, water availability, the access to various modes of transportation? What are the local ordinances for um, air pollutants and processing of hazardous materials? There's a number of additional zoning things depending on how heavy of a manufacturing or an industrial presence. Moving down into kind of a lighter industrial, where it's more warehousing, simple assembly, light manufacturing, some of those zoning requirements are a little bit more forgiving and accommodating for with utility needs. So moving into location, where do we want to invest? Just by looking at this particular map is not saying that these states are where you want to invest. We're going to be looking at a number of different variables. We're going to be looking at what are the local politics? What is the cost of living? Is there income tax, corporate income tax? What are those rates? What are uh, the the people doing? Is there net migration into an area, or are people leaving the state? So once we start determining what markets that we want to be playing in, generally I like to look at what are some of the legislations, and not to get political, the more conservative states generally have laws that are more favorable to how I like to conduct business. For example, there are states that I believe it's this illustration here where they are rated between being renter friendly versus landlord friendly. What is the difference? Well, everybody should be entitled to a safe and quiet place to rest their head. I don't dispute that. However, such things come at an expense. Where you live, what that looks like, that's going to be different for everybody. However, when somebody has more rights just by walking through the door and becoming a squatter, as is known in some jurisdictions, squatters' rights, you may have heard that term, and have more rights than the person who owns the property, pays the mortgage if there's a mortgage, more importantly, who pays the taxes to the property and is responsible for the property from a legal standpoint. To me, I would like the ability to have a little bit more say into how my properties are maintained, who's welcome in the property. And it's not a matter of discrimination, not that at all. It's a matter of maintaining a sound investment. Where will my investment be safe? And we look at some areas historically where, because of political practice, laws on the books, what have you, we've seen riots and other mayhem happen in situations where people get worked up over something and they start damaging property, hurting businesses. That's not where I tend to look to do business. These things happen, but if we can avoid it, that's where I'm looking for. So when we're looking for what areas do we want to invest our funds, we look at things like that. Once we start getting more dialed into, say, I want to invest in Texas or Tennessee or California, whatever the reason might look like, then we start diving into deeper things as far as what is the local economies look like, what is the workforce laid out from an education standpoint, talent standpoint, what are the trades, all of those variables. If you're doing storage units, you start looking at how many rooftops, and same thing for grocery stores. Whenever they start looking to move into an area, how many rooftops will their facility serve? And we dive into a whole lot of information to determine whether the asset will be a safe investment as possible, and productive and profitable. So here we show the Benner cycle chart. And it's not a exact science, but what I want to illustrate here is that in this first top line, we illustrate years in which a panic have occurred. And you can see in between each of these is a number 18, 20, 16, 18, 20, 16, 18, and the pattern continues. And that if we look at that, and we'll look at these here in just a minute and kind of see what has happened, how accurate is this? Because this chart came out in around 1872. This one here shows a signature signed 1875. Could some farmer figure a mathematical equation to the markets that goes throughout time? We'll take a look. In the middle here, we have years of good times, high prices, times to sell stocks and values of all kinds. And at the bottom, we have years of hard times, low prices, good times to buy stocks, goods. And again, we see patterns of numbers. So on between these years of hard times, 7, 11, 9, 7, 11, 9, these years in between, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, 2, 5, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 4, 7, 3. Again, so there is a continuous pattern. So how has this played out over the years? Starting off with years of hard times, we take a peek at the S&P Composite Index, and we take a look at a statistical analysis of the U.S. price home history over the last 130 years or so. So looking at some of these are years of hard times. You see the bottoms of some of these harder times. Over here in the real estate market, again, we're looking somewhere in the bottom of some of these cycles is, wow, okay, so that's playing. So we move on up into the years of good times. How do some of those look? And again, we're approaching the top of a cycle before a drop. Top of a cycle before a drop. Top of a cycle before a drop. Okay, how about on the real estate? We're seeing some enough here to pay attention to. And if we're going all the way up to years in which there were panics, 1981 was the energy crisis. 1999 was the Y2K .com boom. 2019 was the COVID pandemic. And we'll take a look at that one in particular. But again, those things kind of indicate, right, in line with how the market's kind of played. So this chart does start to give us some information. Now in 2019, we did things a little bit different in that whenever there was a panic based off of what was going on, we injected more money into the markets, and also kept everybody home. We superseded some of the rules of engagement when it came to loan terms and things of that nature. And so instead of seeing what should have been a correction anywhere from 2016 on into 2020, we actually saw the market get even more bubblish, if you will, with higher prices. And so what is that really starting to illustrate is that if we give this Benner cycle any credence, is that we see here 2026 is in this years of good times, high prices. We have been seeing number of all-time highs across various stock markets, futures markets, precious metals. Obviously, the situation in the Middle East and Iran has affected oil prices as well as Venezuela. Some of those other macroeconomic factors are relevant, but all that to say, we're in the middle of 2026, and many are saying there are bubbles all around us. So, in particular to real estate, if we follow the chart, the Benner cycle, we're going to watch about the next 6 years start to really change. I have had a property on the market in Colorado for over a year. In fact, it's not active on the market. If being not active on the market stimulates other lead sources, so I'm constantly receiving calls as expired listings. One of those was to come through with the right information. Yes, the house is still for sale. And we're going to look at an example here about another house that's been for sale about a year as well. And we're going to wrap this up here pretty quick. But we have already started to see significant changes from a seller's market into a buyer's market, increased days on market, more concession, reduced prices, sellers offering additional incentives. And so if we watch if we go back and look at what happened with 2006 and that played out into 2008, and the bottom of that market did not actually happen until closer to 2012 for most markets. What we can start to take a look at and anticipate is that, and just looking at this from the simple chance like we do, or from the fact like we do with other stock charts, crypto charts, and we take into account terms like resistance bands and channels, we can see that the real estate market has had over a century long resistance bands that we've been out of the last couple cycles, which means sometimes the bigger they are, the harder they fall. As I mentioned, we should have seen a correction anytime from 2016 on into 2020. I used to teach a real estate course in 2018 about wholesaling and other flipping type activities. And at that point, it's like we're having a market correction anytime now. And that was the pre 2020 COVID situation. So we've been waiting for this for quite some time. And so, considering that, what markets are going to fare better? Just like last time, I would expect communities that have a strong military presence, like Colorado Springs, for example, has 5 major military installations in close proximity and another one or two within an hour, hour and a half drive. The Texas Golden Triangle, the Dallas Fort Worth Metro, Austin, Houston, that general triangle area, that's been a very heavily growing area. There's rumors and prophecies of that being relevant into the years and decades going forward. So that kind of fits that narrative of purchasing for a future value. Some of the tech economies, things like San Jose and San Bernardino, those came out of that last crash a lot faster, as opposed to inland California, like Palm Springs. They it took anywhere from 12 to 14, 15 years to come back to the pre-crash pricing in some of those harder hit areas, even though it's still within California, which we often think as a very successful real estate market. Again, whatever is in high demand, if agricultural communities are of importance, and we're hearing a lot about that in the all the way up from the president's desk with initiatives for agricultural. I think that could be of relevance. But bottom line is, in the average communities, we really could start seeing things coming back into this channel, which starts putting prices into 2014 to 2019 numbers, depending on best case scenario, all the way down into 2012 numbers in some of those harder hit, less populated, not much reason to move communities. And so what's that time frame look like? I really believe that considering the last few corrections and how hyperinflated the last one and this current one is, we're going to see the decline happen over the next 2 to 3, 3.5 years or so, with the full bottoming of the market in some of the hardest areas going all the way out to 2033. So if we're anticipating windfalls of blessing from various investments this year, first part of 2027, real estate may not be the proper place to hedge for a couple years down the road when prices actually are actually better. So we're going to run through a couple of these things real fast. There are other ways as well. Again, we kind of mentioned about being a private lender, doing mortgage notes, tax liens and deeds. That's a great way of acquiring properties. Syndication, that's another thing that I'll talk about here in just a second. But there's also a number of related services that keeps you in the real estate market and in the know, if you will. And that's things like an appraiser, an inspector, uh, loan originators, property management. Most states require that property managers actually have a real estate license. So that's a whole business model of itself. And again, we talk about legal and accounting. But coming back to syndication, that's a whole different deal where you're bringing a group of investors into a larger deal. And that's something that it almost just kind of seems far-fetched for some folks that have worked a 9 to 5, thrown a little bit into their 401k as they could. And how do they buy apartment complexes? How do they buy storage facilities? How do they buy skyscrapers? It's things like syndication. And those are much more advanced, and often historically has included primarily accredited investors and some sophisticated investor relationships. We'll be talking about those kinds of things. So basically what I'm trying to illustrate is that there's a lot of education to be learned, just as we've learned watching other channels like Money on the Move, Kingdom Economic Builders, Generation Next, some of these other kingdom minded groups that believe in the wealth transfer. We've been changing our mindsets, our heart postures. When it comes to real estate, the Lord's going to be providing us a time frame of getting educated on how to invest in real estate wisely, how to time it so that we're not paying twice the price for a particular property. And then, this kind of goes hand in hand with some of the discussions that those other channels talk about, like Money on the Move and Pinpoint Precision. About it's just as important to structure what you own as actually owning something. So how you own your real estate, how you structure those is extremely important. So these things go hand in hand. We'll talk about contracts and terms, and we're going to go through a quick illustration here in just a second, where we combine that as well as creative financing. We'll talk about things about how to do real estate deals in your IRA. I purchased a condo in Phoenix and wholesaled it to a flipper with IRA money several years ago. It was a very sweet deal. So we go through things like that. So I want to talk about this particular house here I've had my eye on. My particular situation is I need a new living arrangement. And this particular property is a 2,200 square foot house, 3 bedroom, 3 bath, 2 car garage, 3 acres. There's no HOA. It comes with irrigation water rights. The location for me is about as optimal as possible. Now, this particular house has been on the market coming up a year, September. It went under contract once and fell out of contract because there was an issue with the septic, and the owner had to go in and do some significant renovations to the septic system. Essentially, the property now has a new septic system to the tune of many thousands of dollars. And after coming back online, getting that work done, they have lowered the price from 739,000 to 699,000. Should this property be available here within the next few weeks to a month, and should the Lord bless us with abundant finances in that time frame, which I'm thinking he might, I could be completely wrong, but if he does, here's how I'm approaching making an offer to this owner of, will you consider not utilizing an agent? So traditionally, when you buy a property, it's listed on some sort of a service, whether that's the MLS or the commercial listing services. And there's a price, and there's agents involved, and they want to earn their money, and they do a good job of earning their money. I don't deny that by any means. But we're approaching in a time when deals will be earned or lost because of the amount of money that a real estate agent commission takes up. And that can mean the difference between you acquiring many properties and not acquiring any properties. So we're going to go through that just really fast, just some simple numbers. So if we were to come in and buy that house we were just looking at their new price of 699,000, and that's assuming we don't find anything to negotiate and haggle the price down a little bit, and we stick somewhere around that 700,000 mark. We can anticipate agent commissions around the 6% mark as historically been, so that's around $42,000. Generally about 1% for your title and closing. So the seller's going to see somewhere under $650,000. If I'm paying cash, I'm writing a check for $699,000, signing some paperwork, and I'm done. Everybody's happy. If I'm doing a loan, similar involvement, similar numbers as far as the seller's concerned. I've got some paperwork, I've got some financing, and if I do all those terms over the span of 6 years, 72 months, I will have paid at that point $772,000 for that property. If we're going into a downward real estate market, that is way too much for that property. In fact, when the property was listed, I was saying that should probably be somewhere around 630 to 650,000 a year ago. So since we're coming up on a year, maybe this person's motivation is, I just want this property gone. Okay, are you willing to do this without agents and save a chunk of money out of this transaction? And we're not trying to break any contracts by any means. Generally, the realtor will have a real estate agent will have a contract with the seller that says something to the tune that whoever you show this property to during the period of time, the agent would be entitled commission. If we have not broke those terms, the seller can make a decision on whether they want to continue with their agent or not. If we're approaching when the contract expires, we're just providing a different alternative for them to think about. But if they say yes, what might that look like? We can lower the price down to remove the agent commission. Our title fees and the closing costs we can anticipate coming down. If we were to do a contract price between 630 to 640,000, the seller's going to see somewhere between 623 to 640,000, still very close to what they saw that previous process with the agent. Me as a buyer, I'm now looking at saving closer to $50,000 or more. That's significant money that maybe I don't have. Maybe I could be better utilizing in a different investment, whatever the case may be. Then the question can be, would you consider owner financing? If they say yes to that, these terms here illustrate somewhat similar numbers, and we'll take a peek. If we do a $610,000 purchase price, 50% down, that's $305,000 down cash. Seller offers 4.75% interest. This particular home is owned outright. There's no existing mortgage that has to be considered. If we consider all the math on a 20-year amortization schedule, and we offer a 6-year, a 72-month balloon, which means that we're not going to drag this out for a long period of time. 6 years, it's all said and done. You will have received whatever the funds are according to the terms. If that can be negotiated, cool. Let's see what happens. How does that look? They agree to that. We come out to follow all those variables. We see what our interest payments look like, our principal payment look like. There's still just under $230,000 left after 72 months. All in all, that seller receives somewhere to the tune of $670,000 between the purchase price of 610 with half of that down, owner financing with interest and principal payments, and the end payoff, that balloon payment at 72 months. I still save money compared to that initial just cash offer of about 25,000. They receive more than they would have for going out on the ledge to work with me in an owner finance situation. Okay. Here's where your contract negotiations come into play. Is there any penalty for an early payoff? That determines on what you put in there. It also matters on how savvy the person is that you're negotiating with. And I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of scriptures here in a second, because we want to operate ethically. But if we do or do not have a minimum interest clause, we'll look at the numbers. If we have a minimum interest clause of 36 months of interest, the number works out to somewhere 640,000 is what I'm all into it for. They still receive 635,000. That's still in that ballpark. That looks great. That's kind of what they're anticipating it's going to look like by the time it's all said and done, based off of what's been discussed. Alternatively, if there's not a minimum interest clause in there and you decide, or the funds are available after 4 months, and you're just like, okay, here's the check, we're done. Cutting out 32 months of interest drops what the seller would receive significantly. It comes down, the numbers work out to where they see closer to $610,000, which is what the actual contract price is after expenses of closing. I see a significant savings. Now, if that's the way the numbers work for the deal, and that's completely communicated, everybody's on board, the motivations have been met, the pain points have been satisfied, so that sounds like a great deal by all parties. But we want to be operating in a situation where we're always ethical. And just real quick, and we'll wrap this up. But over in Luke chapter 12, I'm reading out the King James uh, version. Luke chapter 12, verse 14. And he said unto him, and this is Jesus said unto the person that had asked a question, man, who made me a judge or divider over you? Going on, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. So is it more important to get the deal at all costs, or is it more important to treat your fellow person equitable and fair throughout the process? Paul continues this thought process over in First Timothy chapter 6, uh, starting in verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. And they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men into destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil. So we're reminded that trying to get every nickel and dime out of a deal to the detriment of being fair and equitable to the seller and resolving their pain points and building a relationship and presenting the love of Christ throughout the transaction. If we haven't done that, that's not a deal that I want to be a part of. And so those are the kind of things that we'll be thinking about over the coming months as we talk more and more about real estate. Hope you've enjoyed this one, and we'll see you on the next one.